On 100.9 WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. You are listening to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, New York. Thank you for tuning in on this Saturday, September 22nd, the first day of autumn. We are talking today about affordable housing with representatives from the City Roots Community Land Trust here in Rochester. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host and past guest, Mary Lawrence.
Good morning.
I'm also joined by Joe DiFiore, who wears many hats around Rochester, among them representing the City Roots Community Land Trust. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm also joined by Mohammed Ghazali, also a member of the City Roots Community Land Trust. Good morning to you, Mohammed.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So, folks, if you are new to tuning in to Evidence of Design here at 100.9 FM, we talk primarily about income and wealth inequality in the United States, and we talk about where the inequality comes from, why it's a problem, and what are some things that we can do about it. And so we haven't really touched at all in our past episodes about affordable housing in Rochester, and I'm really thankful to have Joe and Mohammed come on to talk about affordable housing because that is super, super important, and it's also something I frankly don't know much about because I grew up in a local suburb, and I still live at home in said suburb, and so I'm fairly insulated from a lot of the difficulties that people have of trying to get a home that is not an egregious amount of their monthly income, and all of the other issues. So we'll get into that, and we, of course, always want to hear from you on this show, and you can reach us in a number of ways, one of which you can email us at evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. You can also tweet us at evidencedesign0. You can find us on Facebook, Mary. Thank you for helping out with Facebook on the back end of things.
Yeah, you can also find us at Evidence of Design 101 on Facebook. It's the same handle.
Absolutely. And then lastly, of course, you can give us a call at any time throughout the show, 585-219-8889. We'll remind you folks of that throughout the show. And I do want to say also that we are not joined today by Matt Treadwell, our usual co-host. I am a little sick. I think a lot of people are feeling it around Rochester now, and Matt, I think, might have some sort of plague going on, but he's really not feeling well, and it's too bad that he can't join us, but wishing Matt well, and we'll get started with our discussion here. So, folks, ready to take it away?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's do it. Hang tight. You're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. And that was I Want Wind to Blow by a group called The Microphones. They wrote that, I think, in the early 2000s, and that reminds me of autumn, which happens to be one of my favorite seasons. Does anyone reciprocate that?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
I enjoy all the seasons, the changing of the seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is important. I was talking to some folks earlier from Texas, and they were like, yeah, we don't have autumn.
Right.
Like we just don't have autumn. And I forget that that's a thing, living in Rochester, that you just might not experience the seasons.
Yeah, as much as people complain about the weather here, I kind of like the changes, and I think for me it's just the right amount,
Mm-hmm.
I think the key is having activities that you like to do in each season.
Yeah, that's key.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love all the seasons except when it gets too cold.
Too cold.
My bones starts hurting and I want to go back to Africa.
Is that where you're from, Mohammed?
Yes. I'm from East Africa, Somalia, from Somalia to Kenya, Kenya to Rochester.
Wow.
All right.
And yeah, there's probably not 4 seasons in Somalia or Kenya, but
we have about 2 seasons, a rainy season and we have a summer season. That's it.
a rainy season, yeah. That's really like, is fall like a term or
no? We don't have fall because the trees and the fruits and everything stays the same throughout the year. Except we have a drought when we don't have any rain, things get really dry up. But right now, around summertime, is like a rainy season, and during the winter is like summer season.
Wow.
And I just came from Ghana in December, January. I was there for 3 weeks for school, and it was every day 80 to 90 degrees.
And your bones weren't hurting because it was too hot. Not then, right?
It was too hot. It was really nice.
Awesome. Well, yeah, today is the first day of autumn, and again, folks, you're tuning in to Evidence of Design here, and we're talking about affordable housing and with representatives from the City Roots Community Land Trust. So I want to turn it over to those folks and ask, Joe or Mohammed, what is the Community Land Trust? Like, what is that, and what is the model of community land trusts?
So the Community Land Trust, the basic premise of it is really a response to I guess what we could call a failure of the free market, maybe one of its many failures, in my opinion. But talking specifically about affordable housing, right, in a market like Rochester, what the Land Trust attempts to do is remove land from the traditional market and from the hands of individuals and place it into the hands of the community. And through that, we can then empower people that have traditionally been left out of that free market and give them the opportunity to own many parcels of land potentially and have control over it. And that can play out in many different ways. The primary way which we attempt to preserve is permanent affordability. And so through community control, the community gets to decide what permanent affordability looks like. And that's the basic premise, and I can get into all the nuts and bolts of that. But it's really a movement that sprang out of the civil rights movement. There were these tenant farmers in Georgia who, you kind of won the right to vote, and but you didn't. Your landlord perhaps did not agree with that right. So if you wanted to go and vote, and your landlord said, "Sure, you can go and vote, but you can tend somebody else's land if you're going to vote," well, you had a choice between tending your land and feeding your family and yourselves or voting. And so what people realized is that they could come together with the other tenant farmers and save a little bit of money, and then eventually they bought their own land. And they said, we'll buy the land in common, and then we'll lease it from ourselves, and we'll become our own landlords, and we'll make our own decisions over how that land should be used and what rights we should attempt to elevate. And from that sprung first the rural community land trust movement and then the urban community land trust movement, which really brings us to where we are today with over 250 community land trusts in the U.S. alone.
And how old is the community land trust in Rochester that you're a part of with Mohammed here?
So ours is just over 2 years old. Yeah, we're a fully incorporated 501c3 at this point with a board that both Mohammed and I serve on.
And so what I'm hearing from you is that community land trusts are a nonprofit agency that owns the land that houses sit on, and the community land trust can lease the land to the homeowners. That's
exactly right. And it doesn't just have to be homeowners, but it could be commercial properties. It could be urban agriculture, community gardens, pretty much anything you can think of that land can be used for. The difference is that instead of it being in the hands of private developers or the usual moneyed peoples, it's in the hands of the community. And so people who have perhaps generationally never owned a home, or just themselves don't own a home, have the opportunity to have direct control over several parcels in their own community. And that's huge because, time and time again we see that people come in, whether well-meaning or simply motivated by profit, into other people's neighborhoods, and whether we're talking about displacing those people or just not giving those people a real say, at the end of the day, in our society where property rights kind of trump all, if you don't have control over the property, you can't really do much about it. I mean, you can raise a stink and try to get your neighbors out, but if another person owns that parcel of land and they're within the zoning code, they're going to be able to build and do whatever they want with that land. So our solution is, well, then let's kind of beat them at their own game and let's get that land ourselves as the community. We can't do it individually because we don't have those same resources, but together we can do the grant writing. We can pressure our city officials to set aside funds for these efforts, and we can elevate the knowledge around the need for not just affordability permanently, but really I think our goal is to elevate housing and the recognition of housing as a human right, right? Mm-hmm. It's very hard to think that you could survive a Rochester winter, for instance, without housing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a basic necessity. So I see the role of government and the role of those who recognize their civic responsibility as making sure that all our basic needs are provided for. So we have very affordable access to water, for instance, and hopefully we always will. Mm-hmm. And I think the same should be true for our housing. And no one should have any issue with being able to attain adequate housing. And right now, we aren't anywhere near where we should be in that area.
Yeah. Joe or Mohammed, do you have an example of how the Community Land Trust has worked in Rochester, or a specific example of what you're doing?
Well, we don't have any solid proof right now because we're the beginners. Mm-hmm. But what I have experienced personally is I grew up in Gateway community, River Park Commons. I don't know if you guys are familiar, from the Ford Bridge all the way down, the near Time Warner projects, those long projects that used to be there. I don't know if you guys remember. I grew up there and I lived there for over 10 years. And our community, for example, the refugee community and the Somali community and other community that lived there, and basically that was our a small village. And a developer came in, and one day we just got pushed out, and they built multi-million dollar project. And at the beginning they said, oh yeah, this will be good. You guys, when you move out, you can come back. Everything will be nice, welcome. And it just displaced us. And at the beginning, that neighborhood used to be one of the dangerous places when I came in at childhood. And then I grew up there, and we cleaned up as a community, and we made it safe. After a while, they came and took over, and we had to start all over again. And we were put different neighborhoods that we didn't even know about. And it was very sad. And I had to go buy a house on my own, because of that effect.
When did this displacement take place, actually?
2008, 2009.
Okay. Oh, so right around the housing crisis.
Yeah, and now if you drive over there, it's a really cater to rich people.
Is that the blue and yellow building?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
The high rise, they kept that under low income. That one, the people are still living there, but the rest of it, if you start from below the high rise all the way near the Ford Bridge, all that, and the other high rise too next to the bridge, that's also very expensive. And they purposely build 2-bedroom and very minimum 3 bedrooms, so we don't come back as a big family, because everybody that used to live there used to be family, and we used to be like 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And after the project is basically mainly 2 bedrooms, and when we go back and say, hey, we have Section 8 voucher, we have Department of Social Services assistant, and we're this is what we can afford. They say, no, I'm sorry, you don't qualify for the program. You don't make enough income. And that's really sad, you know. I felt like I was displaced from back home, you know, because of the war, and going to Kenya and then coming to here. And then we started our life all over again. And then here's the city, the county, and the state, and so-called non-profit organizations that were helping. They should help the community, and they're the one that was pushing us out, you know, for different reasons. And that's what made me come in and fight for the people through the city land trust, you know.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say, Mohammed, is a lot of different pieces to the story. We're talking about this narrative coming from the 2008 global financial crisis, which just passed its decade anniversary, when poverty increased and hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans lost their homes. We're just passing that 10-year mark, and you're also talking about gentrification.
Yes.
And being forced out.
Yes.
Because cities are becoming more desirable, which is reversing decades-long shifts of suburbanization that was pushed by federal government policy. Mm-hmm. And let's jump into some of those things. And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to 100.9 FM on WXIR in Rochester. And thank you for tuning in. We're joined today by Joe DeFiore and Mohammed Ghazali, representatives from the City Roots Community Land Trust. And the Community Land Trust, if you're just joining in, is a nonprofit that tries to acquire land, and then it owns that land and leases the homes to residents so that housing can be affordable. Did I get that right, Joe? Did I thread that needle?
I think you had it right the first time.
The first time.
We lease the land
okay.
to the owner of the improvement. In many cases, that would be the home. So in all intents and purposes, you know, the homeowner is there. They're living in their home. They own their home outright. They won't even know that the community land trust is there. They have a 99-year lease on the land, which, you know, under property law, basically they're treated as though they own the land outright, and they have, you know, all the same responsibilities and rights to it. And after the 99-year lease, they have the option to renew twice. So it's basically a 297-year lease on the land. That's about as long as you can go in contract law. And the whole idea is that, you know, it just gives us, the community, some say over how that land is used. And in the case of home ownership, our thought is that we would secure some of these houses for permanent affordability and give people that otherwise wouldn't have access to a home ownership opportunity access to that opportunity. So right now we have roughly 65% renters in the city, and what we think that's indicative of is a system that either doesn't work or works the way it was designed, which is maybe to keep people oppressed. But if our goal is truly to get people into homes, like people often tout like the virtues of home ownership, and it's not for everyone. Some people are perfectly content to be renters. But for those who want to be homeowners, if that is our goal, what we're doing now doesn't work, and it won't work because it hasn't worked. So we want to do something different, right? We want to get outside the traditional model. We want to get outside the system. We're looking at systemic change. We think that's the only way that things will change. And so what we'll do is we take these houses and we subsidize them down to a level that is affordable for people that traditionally wouldn't qualify for a mortgage, perhaps. The trade-off is that in order to justify that larger subsidy, what we're asking people to do is when we give them a deal on the house, in order to make it affordable for them, that if and when they decide to sell, that they give the next person that same deal. And we allow for some appreciation. We want the person to build everything they put into the house, they get back. Like all their mortgage payment, that's all their money. And then we allow for some market value appreciation. But we don't want people just to take the subsidy that we put in as the community and then get to walk away with it individually. We want to retain that subsidy for the community. So we say, hey, you've decided to move on. Maybe you have another opportunity. Maybe you're going someplace else. That's great. But we want you to give someone else that same opportunity that we gave you. Mm-hmm. And then you sell it to them at an affordable price. And then they sell it at an affordable price. And so, again, it's about permanent affordability.
And what constitutes this community? I mean, is it something that is just like everyone in Rochester, or like how does one become a member of this community that owns the land?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have we have 3 criteria for being a member of the Community Land Trust. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we want people to be a resident of the city. We think that's important.
Like of the urban area of Rochester?
Yeah, within the city limits of Rochester proper. But then you have to meet 2 out of the 3 criteria. One is you pay membership dues, which would be $25. But we don't want to, we're not about the money, and we recognize not everyone has that $25 to spend. So if you don't want to do $25, you can do the other 2, which are to come to 4 meetings for the Community Land Trust and just participate in those meetings. Mm-hmm. And then volunteer at an event within the past year. So volunteering at an event might be tabling for the Community Land Trust, doing a presentation, coming on a radio show, all that sort of thing. So it's a pretty low bar, but enough where hopefully people feel some buy-in, and they're not just like showing up one day with a few of their friends and greatly influencing what happens, right? Mm-hmm. And then those members actually elect the board, which is really important because we want our board to be both controlled by the community and of the community. So that's actually people who are living in the geographic area, who have kind of have the lived experiences necessary to understand the issues that are making the decisions. And too often we see both for-profit and not-for-profits coming into areas with solutions already in hand. Mm-hmm. And because they have the money that come with those solutions, they get to dictate what those solutions will be. But very rare is it to see those same board members controlling those for-profit or not-for-profits actually coming into the neighborhoods and spending time and getting to know the people and getting to know the real issues, right? And so I think the rest of our membership shares this perspective that it's a very difficult thing to say that you're going to understand a problem and really understand how to solve it, when probably the reason why you have that money and that privilege and that status is because there's a system out there that was benefiting you and setting you up to be in that position, right? And the solution is really going to require you to step out of that system mm-hmm. and maybe even work to dismantle it or work counter to the forces that have benefited you so greatly, right? That's a really difficult thing. It's also a very difficult thing to say, hey, I have $1 million in funding and I'm just going to give it to you, person in poverty, to decide how to use it. And I won't have any influence because I have the $1 million. So, of course, I know better, because if you knew better, you'd be the one with $1 million, right? Right. So, that's important for us. We want to be legitimate. We want to have the people on the board of the community. And we recognize that takes more education, right? Because these are people that haven't served on boards before, haven't done bookkeeping perhaps, haven't taken minutes or facilitated meetings. So there's growth to do there, but there's power in that growth. There's mm-hmm. power in that self-education and and peer education. And that's really what we've been building over the past couple of years, getting better, honing our skills with grant writing, honing our skills with meeting with elected officials and networking with each other and spreading the kind of gospel of community building and mm-hmm. community land trust and community wealth. And but you should cut me off at some point because I'm going to just keep rambling about that.
This is good.
Well, I actually have a question. I'm just thinking, is the community land trust mainly focused on existing structures, or I'm trying to imagine how, or in what way it's different from an organization like Habitat for Humanity, which helps homeowners build homes, which they then own. Like how would you compare those two, if you have any basis?
So first I'll say that so the way that Habitat for Humanity, and we've been in talks with Habitat a little bit, but some Habitat affiliates in different parts of the country actually partner with community land trusts.
Oh, okay.
Because they recognize that something from my perspective I would say is missing from the Habitat model is this both the permanent affordability and the community control. And so I think the Rochester Flower City Habitat for Humanity really works to build a sense of community, and that's great. I think that the element we could kind of extend that sense of community as well by bringing the land trust in the fold, and I also think we bring that permanent affordability piece, because what we're doing, and this isn't just Habitat, but all kind of anyone who's building new is spending a lot more money than what the housing stock is valued at around it. Anyone who's rehabbing the houses currently is putting a lot more money into rehabbing the houses than what the housing stock is valued at around it. And so if you're going to put these huge subsidies into the houses, our argument is that, and this is outside of the moral and the just argument that we try to make, but the fiscally responsible argument is that if we're going to put these huge subsidies in, we should attempt to retain them, right? They shouldn't just go off into the wind, because otherwise what we're doing is we see a need for affordable housing, we generate an affordable housing unit, and then once that person is in there, that affordable housing unit is gone, right? It's only affordable for that one person. But the need for affordable housing still exists, right? So we have to generate another unit, and it's always just one unit up, one unit down, one unit up, one unit down. What we want to do is build community wealth, not individual wealth for that one family that gets into the house and kind of lucks out, but say, now this is an asset for the community. Now we have 100 houses that are permanently affordable in this neighborhood. And that no matter what happens, if the market stays the same, great. We have 100 houses and people have a sense of community. If the market appreciates greatly, we know that we've anchored at least 100 families into a neighborhood. And that's powerful.
And this prevents displacement, gentrification, and being pushed people around, where people can stay there forever and they can raise their family peacefully without being afraid of being pushed out in that neighborhood. They can be part of the wealth that's coming into that neighborhood, and they can be part of it, and they can grow together.
Right. Yeah, and I think too often we see people who, neighborhood groups and not-for-profits, etc., that work to build up a neighborhood, but what they don't prepare for is their own success, right? That's the classic, when we think of gentrification and the displacement. It's almost like people, like when governments invest in a neighborhood, and we have these focus investment initiatives that the city does where they kind of say, we're going to concentrate in this area and try to build that up. It's almost like people, in my mind, don't believe that it will actually be successful. Because if you actually believed it would be successful, you would be prepared for that success. You'd say, well, what's going to happen if all the property values do go up? What are we going to do? Like, will we have permanent places where people could stay? Or will we wait till the houses are all $250,000 houses and then try to secure those houses? It's like, well, I could have bought 5 houses for $250,000 10 years ago. Like, why not do it now and just hedge our bets and say, let's prepare and assume we're going to be successful with this. And that's what we're doing. And Rochester, I think a lot of people say, like, we don't have gentrification in Rochester.
Oh.
And I think
who's saying that? I'm sorry.
a lot of people say that.
What world are they in?
or people they welcome the gentrification, and for me it's kind of a loaded term, and I think we try to propose we try to get at both sides of the issue, right? People who think of like gentrification as investment in a neighborhood, and people who think of gentrification as people being displaced as that investment comes in.
I'm looking at the displacement part.
Right.
Yeah.
So what we try to advocate for with the land trust is development without displacement. And the way to have that development, the only way to invest in a neighborhood and build it up without displacing people is to anchor them to the neighborhood through permanently affordable, not just home ownership opportunities, but permanently affordable commercial opportunities as well. So we also want to recognize that we need storefronts that are affordable for those people who are living in the CLT homes, right? So we want to look at and say, what kind of business does this neighborhood want? Well, every neighborhood wants a grocery store, for instance, or a boutique shop, etc. And what will happen is if you want a business to come into your neighborhood, the business will come and say, well, have you done a market study? And they need the market study because when they go to the bank or the financer, that they're going to say, do you have a market study? And if they don't, they're not going to get the loan. And if the market study says that the market won't support it, they're not going to get the loan. And the market studies always come back and say the market won't support it.
Yeah.
So therefore, they don't move into the neighborhood. So you don't have so you have all the corner stores and all the kind of the barber shops and the hair salons and the nail salons and the cricket stores, etc. Because they're low cost startup business, right? Mm-hmm. So what we propose to do is to say, well, we'll take a commercial storefront and we'll use, if it's a two-story building with apartments on top, we'll set the prices low enough so they're affordable, but we'll use it so that those rents can pay all the bills and we can afford to give a really great deal on the storefront. And perhaps that's just enough to make it so that someone can have their business in there and get a foothold to a point. And we could say, we want this to just be worker co-ops. Any business is welcome, but we want it to be a worker co-op. Or we could say we want these specific subsets of businesses that are determined by the community. But because the community owns it, we get that major say. And then if it's not viable, as it turns out in the end, well, that's on the community, right? That's a lesson that the community learns. That's a lesson that the community has to overcome. But again, the power is in the hands of the community. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
And I want to go off that point, Joe, where first I should remind listeners that you're tuning in to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM, and thanks for tuning in. We're talking about affordable housing today in Rochester, joined by Joe DeFiore and Mohammed Ghazali, board members on the City Roots Community Land Trust. And Joe, you mentioned earlier, and I think you too, Mohammed, talking about we need to get housing to operate outside of the market. Because to my knowledge, housing is very much a free market thing in the United States, meaning that the logic of the free market determines how houses are priced and how they're sold. And the problem with that, when you're mentioning all of these sort of rules or opportunities, Joe, is that the free market makes it so that it makes sense to be greedy and look out for yourself.
Right.
And that's an issue, where we need regulation. Regulation is necessary when the rational choices of individual people cause collective harm.
How is it free market when the city of Rochester knows what's happening for what happened to us? The county knew and the state knew everything about it. I don't call that free market because they're being assisted through government to displace these people and tell them, hey, that's go ahead, good job, I don't call that free market.
I think that's an awesome point, Mohammed. And you mentioned earlier that, Joe, when you're talking about that 65% of Rochesterians are renters, well, that doesn't mean the system is broken. Perhaps the system is performing the way it was intended to, right? The system is set up such that most people are renters. And so I think, Mohammed, what I'm hearing you say is there's this narrative out there that we live in this free market and that it's an even playing field, right? We live in we're all playing Monopoly and we all start off on the same board. But what I'm hearing you say, and I would agree with you, Mohammed, that the government for a long time and other organizations, institutions have policies set up to support some groups of people over others.
Right. Like, for example, if they really wanted to keep us there and help us and see us grow and then to become successful, they would move us out, fix the place up, bring the same statistics of the housing that we had before, like the 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms, and bring us back to that neighborhood, and at the same time let other people come in and live among us. And I would call that pretty fair. Mm-hmm. But pushing us out and telling us thank you very much, bye-bye, and when we come back after a year or two and the project is over and saying, hi, how can I help you? And we say we want to move back in, and I'm sorry, you don't qualify for the program. Try again later. That's the sad part. Yep. And I saw this many, many times. And at that time, I was a young guy, early 20s. I didn't understand what's going on, you know. I just understood all this politics and all this craziness going on recently. It was very difficult for me to understand what are they doing, you know. That's why I didn't have any power to do anything at that time. Our community, you know, our elderly community, they don't know what's going on too. They're just told, you guys just have to move out. They didn't know their rights. They didn't know that they can stay there and make recommendations through the government or the organizations and say, this is our needs and this is what we want, and our community is being displaced. What we have here? What are we getting? You're pushing us out. We lived here 10 to 20 years. This is the only area we know. So that's how I look at it.
I think that's really powerful. And listeners, if you share that story, or if you have other stories, or if you know people who are struggling with affordable housing or want to weigh on this conversation, you can give us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. And if you don't want to talk on air, that's all right. You can email us at evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. Send us a question. We have continuing this discussion on affordable housing in Rochester with representatives from the City Roots Community Land Trust for about another 20 more minutes.
I'm sure this continued before us. We came here as a refugee in the last, 20 to 30 years. How about before us? How many people that got displaced? How many people that got pushed around? I cannot imagine people who grew up in certain areas, got pushed maybe 50 years ago or 60 years ago. Like I hear, like Cornhill right now. Look where it's located. And around it, it's like one of the poorest and dangerous area. But within those blocks, you cannot even come close to it. The housing, one block away from there, you can buy housing for like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. But when you go into that block, the housing jumps over $150,000. What is that about?
And so I wonder, Joe or Mohammed, if you can talk about the area median income that was a really interesting thing I came across. And I believe the mayor's office actually proposed a change to that definition, and it might get to what you're talking about, Mohammed, with how can some houses be worth so much when so close there's houses worth not so much. And perhaps talking about the area median income can help to kind of understand what affordability really means in Rochester.
Can I make one more point?
Sure.
The other thought that I just thought about is when you have individuals or families that live in those areas like these, upscale neighborhood, and these family lived there for like 20, 30 years, and they were okay living there for a while because they're under low income. And then the other thing that I'm really don't like is, they live there for a long time, and then the next thing is the neighborhood is changing, and then the prices changes, too fast, too high for them, and now they cannot even afford the taxes, and that forces them out being sold, through taxes, and then that pushes them out of the neighborhood, economically, and politically, because they cannot be there anymore. And that's another thing that makes me really sad.
Mm-hmm. So what does affordability mean then?
Affordability, to me, means if you live there or you own the property for 30 years or 40 years, and the area is changing and is going high and expensive area, and the taxes should be something that everyone can afford. Don't push it too much where this person that used to live there for 20, 30 years, they raised their family, and then now the house jumped from 50,000 to 150,000, and now things becoming very hard on them. It has to be a way to protect these people. It has to be, because the cycle keeps coming back and is going the same circle and over and over and over and over. And that person that lived there for 20, 30, 40 years, and now they cannot afford the taxes, and they're sold out, and then they have to go to another neighborhood and they become renters, and then the cycle continues again and again and again. How can we stop this? That's what I'm trying to look for. How can we keep the families in the same area, not to destabilize them in a different ways, like gentrifications and changing the areas and raising, the value of their home and all this stuff. Because what I see is everyone knows this is one of the poorest area in the city borders. Keep it the way it is. If people are rich, they want to move somewhere high and expensive, go find that area. Go somewhere where you belong. Don't come where you have poverty, 90, 95%, and then now you come in with a lot of money, and now all these people that live there for a long time and they have their ways, you're going to destabilize it. That what really hurts me.
Joe, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think affordability is really interesting because it's obviously there's multiple definitions there, and there's what you were talking about before, which is the area median income, which is really a federal standard that a lot of the grants are based upon. And so, where we get a lot of our affordable housing currently, our affordable housing developments is funded by affordable housing tax credits. And those are based on the number of units that you include in your development that are at different levels of area median income. And so, just so all the listeners know, the area median income is if you took all the incomes in the greater Rochester area, meaning the multi-county area, and you kind of laid them all out on a line. So everyone's income was plotted out on a line. And then you looked at which income was in the middle of all those numbers. So it wouldn't be the average, just all of them laid out, what's in the center. That's the median number, right? And they do that so that you don't get skewed, if everyone else is making $20,000 and then one person comes in making $500 million, right. You don't want to skew it that way, right? Mm-hmm. So the issue is that it's based on that multi-county area, but most of the affordable housing, in fact, pretty much all of the affordable housing developments are in the city. And the city has a about half the median income of what this Greater Rochester area median income is. So when you come in, you say, oh yeah, we're including all these units at 80% of the area median income. So if you make that amount, you can qualify for a unit. Well, that's a lot of money for a lot of people in the city. So what's happening is you're going and people like Muhammad referenced, you go to these developments and they're like, yeah, it's going to be affordable. And then they come back and they're like, okay, I want to apply. Well, you don't qualify. You don't make enough money. You have to have 80% of the area median income. And you're like, that's 3 times as much as I make, or 4 times, or 5 times, And they're like, well, that's the federal standard.
Right.
So they get to call it affordable, right? And so for the longest time, nobody was really paying attention to this, right? Everyone was really kind of complicit or complacent. And just developers were like, yeah, this is the affordable housing credit, and we're building affordable housing, and we're including 80%. Well, 80% AMI, that sounds good to me. And so all these developments were coming up, and then in the past couple of years, it's really started to get elevated. More and more people, the land trust, the tenants union, all these different groups have been really raising that and so people started to take a closer look at it, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't actually affordable. My constituents are now like complaining that this isn't affordable. Like I'm going to look into it, and they realize, okay, this is not affordable. So they've gone into the city charter now, and they've actually redefined what it means to be affordable, and they've set different parameters. 30% AMI is this kind of affordable, like very affordable, and this is 50% is this kind of affordable. And through that, they can now, when a developer comes, well, they'll put out a request for qualifications to developer. They want a division of development built, and they'd say, hey, we want to have this many units at 50% of AMI. And then the developer, if they want to build it and get approved for it, they have to meet those. That's the idea. We'll see how it plays out, but it's a good step in the right direction. It's up to us, I think, as a community to really push it. But if I have time, I'll give a different perspective on affordability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Affordability is really a relative term as well. Getting outside of what the government is standardizing, right? Rochester, we have what people by and large agree is a depressed market, right? It's very affordable to buy houses here if you're from outside the Rochester area. So that's why we have so many out-of-town investors. If you live on the West Coast, if you live in San Francisco, you're looking at housing prices in Rochester, and you're like, oh, you refinance your house, and you can buy 10 properties or maybe 20 properties in Rochester, and people do. And so what happens is brokers come in with investment portfolios, and they buy whole swaths of houses for their investors that never look at the houses, don't know anything about them, and there's investment in a portfolio. Same thing, people from Australia, France, Israel, you name it, they're coming from all over the place and buying houses here. So it seems like the housing is very affordable, but for the people living here, it's very unaffordable, and for many people. Mm-hmm. And so what you get is that a lot of people are buying these houses from outside the area, and people from the suburbs. But when it comes to the rent, they can only charge so much for the rents, right? So those rents really limit what people are willing to put into the houses. And that's caused our housing stock to really continue to slide further and further down, aside from all the government policies that contributed to that, going way back for hundreds of years, really. We're now at a point where, as an investor, you might say, well, it's not really worth it for me to fix up this house, because if I put a bunch of money into it, I know that I'm only going to get $800 a month out of this house, or $1,000 out of the month, and I want to make my money back, plus a lot of profit. And so it's not really worth it for me. Now, on the flip side, when the neighborhood starts getting better, they're going to charge more, and that's going to allow them to invest more in the house. But the trade-off is going to be they're going to charge more. And that's where we are. So that's what I talked about at the beginning, this market failure, right? The market really doesn't allow for people to make the level of profit that they feel they want to make, their San Francisco money or their wherever money. And it also doesn't allow for the rents to be affordable or the homeownership to be affordable enough for the people who currently live here. So that's why we need something outside of the market, right? The market doesn't work, or it works as it's intended to, which is to keep people down. So we need a different model. We say that let's put it in the hands of the community. Then the community will make the decisions. We'll determine what affordable is. And we won't have to rely on a government standard. We won't have to rely on what people from out of state or out of country want to do with it, but we'll have that control.
Yeah, there's something I also want to bring into this, which is, Joe, you sent us a couple things to read before this show, which I was really appreciative of. And there's a short paragraph I'd like to read from an article from The Nation talking about social housing and a study done by the People's Policy Project, or 3P. So it says, social housing in the United States, the 3P report argues, should be based on universalist principles, with the aim of moving toward a housing model with no means testing. Such development should be mixed income, adequately served by public transport, and have easy access to amenities and shops. They should be regulated in a manner that prohibits discrimination and provides for the disabled and other marginalized populations, and should be largely self-financing, with tenants paying rents on a sliding scale. And some of those things are things that you've mentioned earlier, and are things that, like, as someone who doesn't drive in Rochester, I think about a lot, like the public transport issue and having limited access to, you mentioned commercialism, in particular having grocery stores. And I'm wondering how, is there a way that the Community Land Trust has been working with other parts of the city to, in places where you have affordable housing, is there a way to ensure that there's also access to transportation and food? Because in my mind, I guess housing can't be affordable. If you can pay rent, but you can't feed yourself and you can't get to your job, then it's still not affordable, really. So right. What are you guys doing with that, or plan to, or imagine?
Can I jump in on that?
Please.
Well, now you're opening another book.
I know.
Another
in the last few minutes, sorry.
And I need another day for this.
Come back.
Because
I would love to talk about this more.
Yeah, I mean, transportation is totally, a big subject in the city of Rochester, all the time that I've been here, I went a few times to the public transportation meetings, and I really don't know. I was really confused, and I just left, and I don't still understand their system today. And the transportation, it's really poor, especially people who don't drive in a poor neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. The buses, for example, in car, it takes about, say about 15-20 minutes to go one part to another. In the city of Rochester, if you want to go one side to another, easily it takes, between minimum 1 hour to 2 hours, mm-hmm. because the bus is just takes too long to come to that area. And I was looking at their schedule. Some areas is about, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 1 hour. And especially the area that people need when the transportation comes around every 1 hour, that just puts them, too many hours travel time. And that also limits, going to work on time, coming home on time, and that needs to change. The whole system needs to change. The transportation department, even the population here in Rochester, we're not a huge population. I would make an idea that if it's too expensive to drive, the big buses, bring smaller buses, more frequent, rides to save money, but be affordable and bring more buses around, or smaller buses. Like, back home, we don't have a public transportation. All the transportation is privatized. But it's funny, they're driving, those, like 15 passenger vans, and every 10 minutes you have a bus coming around in the neighborhood. Literally every 10 minutes. And I think we can do better in terms of transportation if they really sit and look at the situation and to reach out to the poor community so they can have access to transportation. And, things are changing because opportunities and job opportunities is outside of Rochester now. Some people, they have to go to Victor, for example. And imagine how many hours it's going to take for them to take a bus from the city of Rochester to go to Victor for a job,
Yeah, I really do know. Genuinely, I don't have a car, and I do take the bus to work, and it takes about an hour and 15 minutes for me to go 4 miles. So I do actually know quite well. I guess my question in keeping this in terms of affordable housing is, how does that affect where there is affordable housing in the city of Rochester? Like, do you look for places, I don't know if you're looking for places that are already owned and are being foreclosed primarily, or like, do you look for places that are already on those bus lines and already have those resources? Like, how do you seek out the places that you're looking to purchase?
We don't add. That's another idea. We're not adding transportation when we look for housing. We just look for stressed homes in poor neighborhood and affordable housing for us to rehab and fix and try to put a family there. We're not focusing transportation. I don't know. Maybe Joe can tell us more.
Joe, we'll give you 60 seconds here to kind of wrap that up, and tell listeners also how they can connect and hear what's coming up about the Community Land Trust and where folks can learn more and get involved.
Okay, well, let me make it quick. I would first say that public transportation in general is wildly underfunded. I would love to see the formation of a riders union to help with that. Along those lines, we're working closely with the tenants union in order to look at some of these buildings where tenants are having issues and unionize the tenants and then form what's known as a limited equity co-op, wherein under that organization tenants could actually purchase their apartments. And really we talked about this at our last meeting, which we meet the third Thursday of every month at 441 Parcells from 5:30 to 7 p.m. So we'd love to have people join us there. All are welcome. But we talked about how the Community Land Trust is really a potential vehicle for larger political organizing. And so I see that as the potential for not just advocating for affordable housing, but for greater issues that affect people living in poverty, transportation being a major one.
And unfortunately, we have to cut the conversation there. Thank you both so much, Joe DiFiore and also Mohammed Ghazali, board members from the City Roots Community Land Trust, for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks again for having us.
Absolutely. So we can continue this discussion much more and bring in housing and food and transportation. But folks, please do, if you're interested, the call is out there to get involved with the Community Land Trust and 441 Ministries again, as you meet there on the third Thursday of every month. So this was episode 25 of Evidence of Design. Thank you, Mary Lawrence, for being here and helping out today as well.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm your host, Jason Taylor. And don't forget, the November 6th, the midterm election is coming up. You still have time to register to vote. Contact